It began with a scratchy whisper over the radio, just static at first, and then a short burst of Morse code. So casual, so ordinary it might have seemed like a misfire. But it wasn't. It was deliberate, and it would go on to change the course of the Second World War. The man behind the radio, sitting in a nondescript flat in London, wasn't a soldier. He was a doubling. Known to British intelligence as Garbo, he was born Juan Pujol Garcia, a Spaniard with a knack for deception and a hatred for fascism. His messages were riddled with a kind of mundanity that made even the sharpest German analyst roll his eyes. Reports of soldiers grumbling about English weather, notes about tea time schedules, and endless pointless chatter. It was, by all appearances, stupid. But that was the point. The British had a plan, a massive, sprawling, ambitious plan. They called it Operation Fortitude, a scheme to convince the Germans that the Allied invasion of Europe would land not at Normandy, but in Pas-de-Calais. Every radio message Garbo sent was a piece of that puzzle. The genius wasn't just in the content, it was in the boredom, the routine, the slow drip reliability that made his fake network of agents seem real. By 1944, Garbo was sending over 20 messages a day to the Germans. His reports were passed on to Berlin with enthusiasm. They were never questioned. In fact, Garbo was so convincing that the Nazis awarded him the Iron Cross, an honor almost never given to foreigners. What they didn't know, of course, was that every single agent in his network was fake, fabricated by British intelligence, managed with meticulous detail, and animated through Garbo's masterful writing. But it wasn't just his talent that made the deception succeed. It was a trick so simple, so stupid on the surface, it bordered on laughable. He delayed his messages. He sent false reports after events happened, pretending they were sent earlier. Then he apologized profusely, explaining away the delay with stories about faulty transmitters or travel issues. And the Germans, they thanked him for warning them just in time, instead of suspecting him. They concluded they had a spy with unbelievable accuracy, the very thing that should have exposed him to the thing that cemented his legend in Nazi eyes. This little trick allowed British intelligence to spoon-feed misinformation to the Germans, without them ever realizing. And as Operation Fortitude ramped up in the months leading to D-Day, Garbo's reports painted a picture of massive troop buildups in the southeast of England. Entire fake divisions were spotted, complete with dummy tanks, wooden aircraft, and radio chatter so dense and convincing it sounded like an army preparing to strike. Hitler boarded, even after the Normandy. Landings had begun, even after Allied troops were dying on the beaches. The Germans held back vital panzer divisions, convinced the real invasion was still to come at Calais. The deception had worked. Garbo's stupid messages had created a reality Berlin couldn't ignore. It gave the Allies the breathing room they needed to establish a foothold in France. The war didn't end that day, but many lives were saved, and it all came back to a radio, a few lines of Morse code, and a Spaniard who wanted to fight fascism in the only way he could, by lying his way to the truth. In the dim-lit office on Baker Street, the heart of British counterintelligence pulsed with quiet urgency. The men and women of MI5 knew they were orchestrating the most delicate lie in modern military history, and at the center of it all stood Garbo. Sat rather stiff and calm, his hands poised over the radio set like a concert pianist awaiting his cue. By 1943, the Allies were planning something monumental, Operation Overlord, the liberation of Nazi-occupied Europe. But the stakes were terrifying. A misstep could cost tens of thousands of lives. Success depended not just on strategy or firepower, but on misdirection. The Germans had to be looking the wrong way when the blow came. That's where Operation Fortitude came in, and that's where Garbo's absurd genius began to shine. The deception was split into two parts, Fortitude North and Fortitude South. Fortitude North aimed to convince the Germans of an Allied invasion into Norway, tying up German troops far from France. Fortitude South, the more critical piece, would fool them into believing the main Allied thrust would hit Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. To do that, the British needed noise radio chatter, troop movements, dummy infrastructure, and most importantly, a steady stream of believable intelligence feeding Berlin's war machine. Garbo's messages weren't flashy. In fact, they were infuriatingly banal. Observed convoy of trucks in Saturn, if fuel or rations. Spoke to sergeant from 52nd Division. Complaints about food quality continue. Rain caused delays in field exercise near Dover. Morale low. Each note was a small droplet in a flood of carefully curated fiction. My 5 handlers crafted fake units with command structures, training routines, even social dynamics. They forged love letters, gossip, and arguments among imaginary soldiers. Garbo's network ballooned to 27 agents, each with distinct voices, backstories, and areas of coverage. None of them existed. The Germans never suspected. But the brilliance, the twist that would baffle historians for decades, was Garbo's consistent delay in reporting real events. After they had already occurred, he would hear news of a military movement, wait until it was complete, then send a message pretending he had sent it earlier. And instead of raising suspicions, the Germans praised him. One example still haunts military textbooks. In 1944, Garbo reported that American divisions were relocating to prepare for a major invasion. The message reached Berlin after the movement had happened. He apologized. "I tried to warn earlier, but my courier was delayed. I am deeply sorry." The Abwehr responded with warmth and gratitude. "Your information has proven accurate once again. We trust you completely." It wasn't just a radio trick, it was psychological warfare. He conditioned his Nazi handlers to expect perfection delivered late. By consistently failing in a specific, explainable way, he made himself seem even more human, flawed, apologetic, and utterly loyal. The Abwehr agents in Madrid who handled Garbo were so enamored with him that they fought to keep his transmissions prioritized. His codename in German records was Agent Arabelle, and his loyalty was never questioned. The Nazis believed they had a man inside the British war machine. In truth, the man they trusted most was working with the British to manipulate them with cartoonish ease. Meanwhile, the Germans kept building defenses at Pas-de-Calais. Hitler refused to reassign tank divisions to Normandy for 7 weeks after D-Day. 7 weeks of bloodshed. Yes, but without Fortitude and Garbo, the beaches of Normandy might have turned into a massacre. And so, through a trick that should have backfired, delaying critical military intelligence, Garbo became the most dangerous man to ever touch a transmitter. At one point, Berlin sent a message to London via Garbo's channel. They were pleased with his work. They wanted to meet him in person after the war. Mi-5 read the message with restrained horror. Garbo chuckled. They all knew the meeting would never happen. By the spring of 1944, the British had built a world that didn't exist. From the air, German reconnaissance aircraft could spot entire divisions in southeast England, vehicles parked in formation, supply dumps lined up with military precision, tents and barracks stretching across open fields. But those vehicles were rubber, the barracks were canvas facades, and the soldiers who supposedly manned them, ghosts, figments of British imagination. They called it the 1st U.S. Army Group FUSAG, a completely fictional force supposedly commanded by General George S. Patton, the one man the Germans feared would lead any major invasion. Stationed in Kent and Sussex, FUSAG became the centerpiece of Fortitude South. The Germans had no idea it didn't exist, largely because of the lies Garbo continued to feed them with every passing day. The deception grew deeper. Garbo's reports became richer, more layered. His imaginary agents described drunken American officers leaking classified information at pubs, British colonels bemoaning the delay in action at Calais, and even logistical struggles moving non-existent tanks. He painted a picture so real, the German high command became obsessed with the southeastern English coast that was working. Hitler ordered his forces to strengthen the Calais region. Concrete fortifications, minefields, and anti-tank weapons were poured into a place that wouldn't see a single Allied boot hit its shores. The Nazi war machine was digging its own grave with every reinforcement it shifted away from Normandy. And the most absurd part, they believed they were ahead of the game. Behind the scenes, Mi-5 agents overseeing the double-cross system were running a psychological marathon. They controlled every known German spy in Britain. Every single one had been captured or turned. That kind of blanket control was unprecedented. Through Garbo and others, the British weren't just faking intelligence. They were curating the entire narrative the Nazi regime believed about the coming invasion. And yet, Garbo's Morse trick, the delay that should have made every German analyst suspicious, remained the key. In late May 1944, just days before D-Day, Garbo sent a transmission claiming a rising concentration of forces near Dover. He estimated an invasion window sometime in early June, targeting the Pas-de-Calais. He apologized for the lack of detail, said his contacts were nervous. One had fallen ill. The Germans didn't scoff. They highlighted the report. Berlin's intelligence circles discussed it as credible, concerning and aligned with earlier patterns. Meanwhile, in the real world, ships were already assembling off the coast of southern England. Troops were making final preparations. The actual invasion at Normandy was just days away. And still, Hitler was convinced that Normandy, if attacked, would be a diversion, the prelude to a real assault on Calais. The British couldn't believe it. Everything was working. The absurdly dull reports, the fake traffic jams, the rubber tanks, the stupid delayed radio transmissions, it had all come together. They had led an entire regime into the fog. Then came June 6, 1944-D-Day. At 6:30 a.m., Allied troops stormed 5 beaches in Normandy. Chaos erupted across the coast. German resistance was fierce, and thousands died within hours. But Garbo wasn't done. That very morning, while soldiers were still bleeding in the surf, Garbo sent yet another message to Berlin. In it, he explained that the invasion at Normandy had begun, but he warned it was clearly a feint. His agents reported that FUSAG was still intact, Patton was still in command, and the true blow at Calais was imminent. Berlin swallowed the bait whole. They kept the 15th Army stationed at Calais, waiting for the second invasion that never came. They refused to release vital divisions to support Normandy's defense. For nearly 2 months, as the Allies clawed their way inland, the Germans held back their strongest armored units, paralyzed by Garbo's deception. All because of a simple trick. sending real information late and making it seem early. What the Germans thought was too good to be false had, in truth, been crafted in a back room in London, designed by men who understood that trust wasn't earned by brilliance but by boring, believable mistakes. The mood inside MI5's clandestine headquarters was oddly somber on the night of June 6th, even though D-Day had gone ahead as planned, and even though the initial reports from Normandy were cautiously optimistic. No one was celebrating, not yet. The success of the largest amphibious invasion in human history still teetered on a razor's edge. Victory in Normandy wouldn't come with the storming of the beaches. It would depend on how long they could hold them, and for that, they needed one thing to continue working flawlessly. Garbo. Back in his small, dingy London flat, Juan Pujol Garcia sat with his handler Tomas Harris, a British intelligence officer fluent in Spanish and subtlety. The two had built the lie together, brick by brick, agent by agent, until the fictional spy network became so elaborate it required a full-time staff just to manage its paperwork. They joked sometimes that Garbo had better attendants than real agents, but on this night, they weren't laughing. Berlin was still buying the story, but now, with Allied boots on French soil, Garbo had to perform the most delicate act of deception yet. Keep the Nazis believing in a second, larger invasion while never letting them suspect he'd lied to them if even a sliver of doubt crept into Berlin's confidence in Agent Arabelle. The entire double-cross system would crumble. They would know the invasion had come to Normandy, not Calais. They would shift their reinforcements. They might even begin to hunt for the traitor who had fed them the lie. So, Garbo did what he always did. He played the fool, the dutiful agent overwhelmed by the scale of events. His next radio message was a masterclass in manipulation. He expressed concern. He told his German handlers that the Normandy invasion had caught him by surprise too, but he insisted it didn't match the real invasion he had warned them about. The landings, he said, lacked the coordination, with scale and signal preparations one would to expect of a true offensive. He promised he would double with his network and send a full report soon. It was a dangerous play, bold even by Garbo's standard start. If the Germans suspected even for a second that he had been feeding them false intelligence, they would either cut him off or worse, expose the entire British double-agent operation. Every spy under MI5 control, every single channel feeding Berlin would be compromised. But the response from the Abwehr came back. As always, praising him, they thanked him for the update. They believed the Normandy invasion might indeed be a diversion, and told him to continue his good work. MI5 officials who read the decoded intercepts could hardly believe it. Despite the storm raging across the beaches of Normandy, Berlin still believed Garbo, and the disinformation campaign continued. In the days following, Garbo fed his handlers reports of the fictitious Fusag still preparing in Kent, their tanks rolling slowly, their men restless for combat. He hinted at growing tension in the command ranks, disputes over timing, speculation that Patton was awaiting an opportunity. Meanwhile, real Allied soldiers, British, American, Canadian, were fighting brutal battles in hedgerows, villages, and fields, slowly clawing their way inland from the beaches. Every German unit held back at Calais was one less obstacle on their path. Every delayed panzer column was a life potentially spared. What few realized at the time was just how close the ruse had come to unraveling. Not all German officers believed in Garbo, some, particularly inside the SS and Wehrmacht High Command, Questionedy. Their vaunted agent hadn't predicted the Normandy landings with more clarity. A small group in Berlin even began an internal inquiry into intelligence failures, but by then, Garbo's legend had become too big to fail. He had been right so often about so many small, believable things that his credibility was untouchable. The Germans blamed internal errors, sloppy field reports, and their own misinterpretations before they would even consider that Arabelle had betrayed them. In reality, he had done far more than that. He hadn't just lied, he had rewritten their reality, and the war was shifting. By mid-July 1944, the beaches of Normandy had become something entirely different, not just a point of invasion, but a critical artery pumping Allied power deeper into France. Tanks rolled inland, villages fell, the German front lines once thought unbreakable were beginning to bend, and still, Hitler refused to release his armored reserves stationed in Pas-de-Calais. The 15th Army, fully equipped, battle-ready, and positioned for rapid deployment, sat idle, waiting, watching the wrong coastline. They were under strict orders from the Führer himself. Hold position. The true invasion, he believed, was still to come, and all the while, in a London flat soaked in cigarette smoke and silence, Garbo kept typing. His Morse code machine clicked rhythmically, sending yet another message through the ether. His tone in the reports had changed subtly. No longer nervous or hesitant, he now sounded analytical, calm, measured. He told Berlin that his network had encountered delays, disruptions, and confusion, exactly the kind of friction one might expect if a massive force was struggling to launch a delayed attack. He said Calais was still the target. He even claimed that agents in his fictional network had seen high-ranking officers of the 1st U.S. Army Group visiting Kent, offering visual confirmation that General Patton himself was in the region. In truth, Patton was being kept out of Normandy on purpose, precisely to support the ruse. Garbo's fiction was now functioning on inertia. The groundwork he had laid in months past was doing most of the work for him. Even as real events contradicted the lie, German faith in him never wavered. The Nazis sent him more money, more praise, more coded questions, and not just Berlin. His Abwehr handlers in Madrid were so convinced of his value that they began sending requests for detailed updates about the post-invasion phase. They were still asking Garbo about imaginary troop movements and logistics inside Kent, ignoring the obvious signs that the Normandy beachhead was growing into a full-scale Allied advance. The irony was breathtaking. Garbo, sitting safely in Britain, sending deliberately late messages about things that hadn't happened and never would, was now shaping Hitler's understanding of the war itself, and no one dared question him. But inside MI5 there was tension. British officials feared that at some point the lie would collapse under its own weight, that eventually the Germans would wake up, pull their divisions from Calais, and retaliate with crushing force in Normandy. The longer the deception held, the greater the risk, so MI5 decided to end the game gradually, subtly, without revealing the con. They had Garbo begin shifting his reports. Instead of predicting imminent attacks, he now wrote about logistical delays in Fusag. He hinted that the command was struggling with internal disorganization. His tone became uncertain again, a return to the cautious, slightly flustered agent Berlin had grown to trust. The intention was to let the lie die a natural death, slowly draining belief from the German side, without sparking suspicion. Let them think the real invasion had been postponed indefinitely, or that Allied plans had changed. Meanwhile, the Allies broke out of Normandy. In late July, Operation Cobra unleashed devastating American firepower through the German lines. Towns collapsed. German morale buckled. The myth of Calais began to fade, though Hitler stubbornly clung to it for several more weeks. The 15th Army remained frozen, their orders unchanged, and Garbo, he kept reporting. By now, the delay trick had become almost comical. He was sending updates about the Normandy landings nearly a month after they occurred, still pretending they were fresh tips, and the Germans were still thanking him for the advanced warning. It was no longer just deception, it was domination. The most disciplined intelligence agency in Nazi Germany, the UP, now an unwitting puppet, feeding their furor pure fiction, straight from a Spanish man who never lifted a weapon, a man who fooled a regime with boredom and broken clocks. As the summer of 1944 gave way to autumn, the Nazi war machine began to sputter and crack. Paris had been liberated. The Allies were advancing from both the west and the south. The Soviet army was pushing in from the east. Hitler's once fearsome Reich was being squeezed from all directions, and still, the 15th Army waited near Pas-de-Calais, guarding an invasion that had never come, never would, and never even existed. Inside Berlin, the frustration grew. Officers debated what had gone wrong. Why had the Normandy invasion succeeded? Why had the Reich been caught off guard? Why had so many of their divisions been positioned in the wrong place for so long? But no one, not even in whispers, dared question Agent Arabelle Garbo had become their legend, their model, a spy who never wavered. In fact, in August 1944, 2 full months after D-Day, he received a personal message from Berlin, a coded note from the Abwehr, congratulating him on his invaluable service to the German war effort. He was awarded the Iron Cross Second Class, one of Nazi Germany's most prestigious military honors. Only a handful of foreign nationals had ever received it. Garbo, a man who had never so much as fired a bullet for Germany, now held the same medal awarded to frontline soldiers fighting on the Eastern Front. He accepted it quietly. MI5 agents in London, reading the decrypted message, was stunned. It was almost too much to believe. Garbo had lied to the Nazis so effectively, for so long, that they had rewarded him for helping them lose at the same time. British intelligence was winding down the deception. Fortitude had served its purpose. Fusag was slowly disbanded, its fictional divisions retired, its ghost soldiers quietly erased from the maps. The disinformation channels were eased back. The radio traffic slowed. Garbo began to vanish. BI5 helped him disappear from the public record. The danger was still real. If the Germans ever realized how completely they'd been misled, there was every chance they'd try to find and kill him even after the war. So Garbo was granted a new identity, a new life. He moved to Venezuela, under British protection, and vanished into civilian obscurity. For decades, he was presumed dead even by those who had once worked with him. In Spain, his own mother believed he had died in Africa. In Britain, only a select few knew the truth, that the man who had tricked an empire into looking the wrong way was alive and well, living quietly under the sun. The truth didn't begin to come out until the 1980s, when historians started digging into MI5 records and declassified documents. The sheer scale of Garbo's deception shocked even seasoned intelligence experts. 27 fictional agents, dozens of fictional reports per week, hundreds of pieces of disinformation, and most of it powered by the same ridiculous trick: delayed radio messages. He lied about real things after they happened and convinced the enemy he had predicted them. The Germans believed they had a prophet on their side. What they really had was a man who'd mastered the psychology of trust. Juan Pujol Garcia, codename Garbo, codename Arabelle, had shown the world that truth and lies weren't opposites, but tools. In the right hands, a lie repeated with enough dull conviction could steer tanks, silence divisions, and shift the tide of history. In 1984, he returned to Normandy under invitation. The British, who had never forgotten, finally honored him publicly. Veterans wept when they met him. Soldiers who had stormed the beaches shook his hand, not for firing a gun but for making sure the enemy was looking the other way when they landed. Garbo died peacefully in 1988. There are no statues of him in London, no grand plaques in Berlin, but historians agree, without his work, D-Day could have failed. And it all started with a stupid little trick on a radio sent too late, read too eagerly, and believed too deeply. That was the genius of Garbo, the man who fooled the Nazis by being boring,